Hello, welcome to today's newspaper review. I'll be taking you through this segment. We'll start with the Daily Trust. On the Daily Trust newspaper, we have so much headlines on the front page of the newspaper, but we'll take just few of the headlines. In the lead page of the Daily Trust newspaper, 1 year after launch, where are the forest guards? I think Nigerians are asking that where are the forest guards after 1 year? You get the full story on page 4 of the newspaper. A growing danger or cause. Akukura is asking, is it a growing danger or a cause? You get the full story on page 15 of the newspaper. 9 soldiers die repelling terrorist attack. 9 soldiers have been killed due to the terrorist attack in Nigeria. You get the full story on page 20 of the newspaper. We'll move away from that newspaper to the Leadership newspaper. In the Leadership newspaper, on the front page, we have so many political stories and headlines dominating the Leadership newspaper, but we'll take few of the newspaper. On the lead page of the newspaper, abductions threatened WAEC exams, raise fear for 1.9 million candidates. Abductions threatened WAEC exams, raise fears for 1.9 million candidates. You get the full story on page 4 of the newspaper. At the top of the newspaper on politics, coming from Atiku, Obi and Makinde, what we will do differently as president. So Atiku, Obi and Makinde have stated what they will do differently as president if peradventure they become 2027 and president in Nigeria. You get the full story on page 9 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper on page 23, Goba primary fallout threatens ADC's ambition in Jigawa. You get the full story on page 23 of the newspaper. Goban primary fallout has threatened ADC's ambition in Jigawa State. Still in the same newspaper at the top as well on page 7, students, teachers abduction, Oyo Muslim reject terrorists, Sharia demand. So Oyo Muslims are rejecting terrorists and Sharia demand due to the students and teacher abduction that took place in Oyo State. You get the full story on page 7 of that particular newspaper. Then on the business, stock market rebounds as investor gain 234 billion naira. You get the full story on page 18 of the newspaper. And at the foot of that newspaper on page 7, senior lawyers divided over state police. Senior lawyers are divided over state police. Recall that there was a meeting between high-stake officials, Inspector General of Police, Ekpetugun, and the likes of Benjamin Carlo and so many others. They had stakeholders meeting to decide on this state policing. But then it has created a lot of division among the senior lawyers over this particular issue. So you get the full story to continue reading. From this headline, you get the full story on page 7 of that newspaper. Then on page 12 of the same newspaper, commuter stranded as Taraba Bridge collapses under heavy rain. Wow, this is really sad. Commuter stranded as Taraba Bridge collapses under heavy rainfall. I mean, perhaps the bridge was not properly constructed, and now road users are actually stranded due to this tragic incident that happened in Taraba State. Still in the same newspaper on page 15, Bauchi governor orders probe as 7 died in farmers' header clash. Bauchi government has ordered probe as 7 die in farmer headers clash. You get the full story on page 15 of the newspaper. Sultan urges police to partner traditional rulers on security. Sultan urges police to partner traditional rulers on security. So Sultan of Sokoto has ordered police to partner with traditional rulers on insecurity. You get the full gist on page 12 of the newspaper. We move away from that newspaper to the Guardian newspaper. On the Guardian newspaper, we'll see so many headlines dominating the front page. We'll begin with the lead page. Despite billions spent, Lagos low-cost housing excludes 70% of residents. You get the full story on page 8 and page 9 of the newspaper. Then at the top of that same newspaper, 2027, this is on politics, 2027 team Tinubu and danger of assumption. You get the full gist on page 2 of that newspaper. Still on politics as well, why I prefer Tinubu to other political leaders, coming from Nyesom Wike. Is Nyesom Wike being one-sided? He has stated his reason why he preferred President Bola Ahmed Tinubu to any other political leader. You get the full gist on page 2 of the newspaper as well. Then at the foot of that particular newspaper, coming from Oyo State Governor on adoption, Makinde restricts nighttime Okada operation in Oyo State. So night Okada riding has been banned in Oyo State. You get the full story on page 3 of the newspaper. Due to this abduction crisis that is happening in Oyo State, the governor of Oyo State, Seyi Makinde, has actually restricted night movements by Okada riders. Still in the same newspaper on insecurity, tears, blood flow on the road to 2027 polls. You get the full story on page 2 of the newspaper. The road to 2027 is filled with blood, filled with insecurity, filled with tears and chaos. And perhaps 2027 election might just be on a hold for now. I'm just alleging. Still in the same newspaper on page 34 of that newspaper, PDP tackles Fayose for politicizing Oyo abduction. You get the full story on page 44 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, SSDC warns businesses against cyber election-related risks. You get the full story on page 3 of that particular newspaper. Then on World Environmental Day, Ogoni cleanup, sequestering carbon, surviving livelihood, coming from the HYPREP. You get the full story on page 44 of the newspaper. Ogoni cleanup, sequestering carbon, surviving livelihood. We'll move away from that newspaper to the Vanguard. On the Vanguard newspaper, there are so many headlines dominating the Vanguard newspaper. And on page 10 of that newspaper, coming from Revealed, hideout of terrorists in Yoruba land. Then the follow-up stories there is vast stretches of forest taken over, coming from Afenifere. At the top of that particular newspaper, behind closed doors, Lagos hotel where kidnappers operated from. You get the full story on page 22 of the newspaper. I mean, behind closed doors, there are Lagos hotels where kidnappers are actually operating from. Then on page 7 of the newspaper, still on insecurity, Bode George falls at Deboye's ultimatum to service chiefs. Bode George falls at Deboye's ultimatum to service chiefs. Bode George has faulted the statement from RCCG's pastor Adeboye on his demand on his statement to the service chiefs. You get the full story on page 7 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper on page 13, boy 17 killed in EFCC operation, mother cries for justice. So my innocent son will not rest until his killers are brought to justice. The mother of the innocent 17-year-old boy who was killed in the EFCC operation, the mother is saying that the killers should be brought to justice, and the spirit of her son will not rest until justice is prevailed. Condolence to that woman for the loss of her son. Still in the same newspaper on page 8 as well, 3 trillion naira airtime advance market. Tinubu orders breakup of 12-year monopoly on airtime credit lending. Coming from President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, still in the same newspaper as well. Federal government lacks political will to fight terrorism, coming from Dalong. You get the full story on page 12 of the newspaper. Dalong says that federal government lacks political will to fight insecurity in Nigeria. We move away from that particular newspaper to the Nigerian Tribune, boldly written in the newspaper. Makinde cracks down on insecurity, bans night Okada operations in Oyo State. This is actually surfacing again. We saw it in the previous newspaper. You get the full story of this on page 4 of the Nigerian Tribune newspaper. And then at the top of the newspaper, I will be great. Or we read teachers' last lesson on the blackboard. You get the full story on page 3 of the newspaper. This is the last lesson that Oriri teacher last taught in the school, and the subjects or the description on the board was "I will be great." So you get the full story on page 3 of the newspaper. I mean, this was the last lesson that was taught on handwriting before the adoption took place in Oriri local government area. Still in the same newspaper, Atiku blasts Tinubu first lady over political gatherings, while adopted pupils, teachers remain in captivity. You get the full story on page 5 of the newspaper. But then on page 13 of the newspaper, at the right of the newspaper, Peter Obi laments rising school abduction, asks youth to reclaim Nigeria. So Peter Obi has asked Nigerian youth to reclaim Nigeria over the rising school abduction. Still in the same newspaper as well, arrested cult leader. I participated in killing only 4 people. You get the full story on page 19 of the newspaper. Then on page 28 of the newspaper, Federal Capital Territory Police arrest suspected kidnappers seen in viral video. Kudos to the Federal Capital Territory, that's the FCT police, who succeeded in arresting kidnappers seen in a viral video. So you get the full story on page 26 of the newspaper. Then we'll move away from that newspaper to the Punch newspaper. On the Punch newspaper, this is actually surfacing again due to the Oyo abduction. The Muslims has rejected terrorist demand for Sharia law. So terrorists are demanding for Sharia law, and the Muslims part of Nigeria has rejected that demand from the terrorists. You get the full story on page 4 of the newspaper. Then on 2027 politics, parties rule out poll postponement over rising insecurity. Parties rule out poll postponement over rising insecurity. You get the full story on page 8 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, grieving mother. EFCC accused my son of fraud, killed him while on bail. This is very sad. The mother of the 17-year-old boy who was killed by EFCC operation, the mother said that the EFCC accused the son of fraud and they killed him while he was still on bail. You get the full story on page 28 of the newspaper. This is very, very sad. Still in the same newspaper, Boko Haram overrides Borno military base, beheads soldiers and vigilantes. Boko Haram overruns Borno military base, beheads soldiers and vigilantes. Still in the same newspaper on page 19, Senate to fast-track state police amid terror attacks, coming from the Senate President Akpabio. He says that they will fast-track state police amid the terror attacks. You get the full story on page 19 of the newspaper. Justice can't restore my legs. I lost to terrorists. Coming from a war attack survivor. You get the full story on page 2 of the newspaper. We'll move away from that newspaper to the Matrix. On the Matrix newspaper is still in insecurity. Tinubu won't rest until peace returns, Shettima declares. So the Vice President, Shettima, says that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu will not rest until peace returns to Nigeria. At the top of the newspaper, coming from the minister, federal government targets 7,000 jobs through ranching. Federal government targets 7,000 jobs through ranching. Still in the same newspaper as well. Supreme Court dismisses appeal, confirms death sentence for kidnapping. Still in the same newspaper, at the right of the newspaper. Alleged 36 million naira fraud. Blessing CEO to remain in jail till June 9, coming from the court. So Blessing CEO is still in custody due to alleged 36 million naira fraud that she allegedly said that she had cancer of the breast, and she mentioned that she has stage 4 cancer of the breast, and a lot of Nigerians were moved towards helping her, but got to discover that she wasn't even sure of the doctor's report, and she's still in the police custody till June 9th. That happens to be next week. Still in the same newspaper, pastor arraigned as Anambra intensifies crackdown on fake clerics. Pastor arraigned as Anambra intensifies crackdown on fake clerics. Pastors arraigned as Anambra intensifies crackdown on fake clerics. Still in the same newspaper, NRS NMDPRA deepened institutional partnership to enhance revenue regulation. We move away from that newspaper to the Daily Monitor. This happened to be our last newspaper for today. Still on insecurity, Obi cautions against reactive approach as Makinde signs executive order restraining Okada. You get the full story on page 2 of that same newspaper. Then at the top of the newspaper, coming from the World Health Organization, unhealthy food causes 866 million illnesses, 1.5 million deaths annually. You get the full story on page 9 of the newspaper. So the World Health Organization has stated that unhealthy food causes 866 million sicknesses, that's illnesses, and then it also causes 1.5 million deaths annually. That's every year 1.5 people are dying every year due to unhealthy food. Then on page 2 of that newspaper, turmoil in Ebonyi NDC over alleged fake candidates list. Protest plan. So Ebonyi State are planning a protest over alleged and fake NDC candidate list. Then on page 2 of the newspaper, ADC sues Justice Suhu NGC over judicial bias. So the ADC are suing Justice Suhu NJC over judicial bias. You get the full story on page 2 of the newspaper. Then on entertainment, coming from Juliet Ibrahim, Nollywood actress, everything you see online is not real. So Nollywood actress is telling you and I that everything that we see online is not real. They are actually fake life. So you get the full story on page 16 of the newspaper. Then this is coming from actress Shafi Bello. Nollywood actress Shafi Bello, she says, my advice to Nigerian runs girls. She's giving her advice to Nigerians and run girls, coming from actress Shafi Bello. So to know what her advice is to Nigerian run girls, you get the full story on page 5 of the newspaper. Try to read the newspaper to see what her advice is actually for the Nigerian runs girls. Then on page 2 of the newspaper, Nigerians groan over high cost of tomatoes, pepper and crayfish. Nigerians are groaning over the high cost of pepper, tomatoes in the markets. We've come to the end of the newspaper review. Do well to follow up for more stories coming up next, and do have a beautiful day.